We're giving a historical perspective to the ongoing saga, never-ending saga, which the graphic led on earlier yesterday. Yesterday's graphic led on the Flight Lieutenant Rawlings situation, whether or not the money that had come from Nigeria to him, to what reasons it was applied. Mr. Rawlings maintains that he cannot be bribed and that, in fact, the money was sent to him for certain purposes that he personally did not benefit from. Tonight, we would like to bring a historical perspective to the matter and to explain to our viewers, younger viewers, and those who were not interested at the time, actually what happened. Take the first 15 minutes of the program to show viewers what actually happened and the context within which all of these things occurred. That then culminated in the conversation about whether Mohammed Sani Abacha, the famous Nigerian, or perhaps the infamous Nigerian dictator, whether or not he had given Flight Lieutenant Rawlings a certain amount of money to, as it were, manage his international relations for him. So the story begins with Nigeria attempting to change over from long years of military rule now into a democracy. The same thing that Ghana did. And if you observe, you will notice that Ghana and Nigeria have striking political similarities in terms of the events that occur. I'll not go to that yet, but Ghana and Nigeria have had very striking occurrences. So in 1992, Ghana decided to go into a constitutional regime after a decade of military rule. In 1993, Nigeria decided to do that as well, to go into a constitutional regime. The difference, though, is that General Ibrahim Babangida, who was the Nigerian president at the time, did not contest the elections. General Babangida led the Nigerian military government after overthrowing the first coming of Muhammad Buhari in the 1980s, 1983 or 84 it was. So General Babangida was president of Nigeria at the time in 1993 when elections were called. And the two candidates who were for the elections were Moshood Abiola, who is a famous businessman, and also another candidate whose name I can't remember right now. But Moshood Abiola was the main big deal in the whole equation. Now, Moshood Abiola is reported to have won that election, the ill-fated June 12th election. And when Abiola won the election, it was believed that Babangida did not like Abiola to be the president of Nigeria, especially after him. He swore not to hand over to Moshood Abiola. Now, we have to put Moshood Abiola in context because we'll be showing a video about him in a minute. Now, Abiola was the kind of businessman. So in Nigeria today, you will liken him to Dangote or the Tony Olumulus of the time. Abiola was, however, in more retail kind of service provision and was a big winner of government contracts, right, from the early 80s of Mohammed Shehu Shagari. So Moshood Abiola had become particularly wealthy in Nigeria, and he threw his hat in with a lot of pressure from many people that he wanted to be president. So he was like a Donald Trump of sorts of today, you know. So Abiola came into the election as a pure businessman. He self-funded his election. He ran on Abiola. Then in June 12th, appeared to have won the election. And when he won the election, General Babangida stepped in and decided that Abiola cannot be president. When that occurred, the Nigerian people routed on the streets. Abiola was arrested, and a Shonekan was put in place. So Abiola then went into prison against a lot of harassment, and he was kept in prison, and a new person, and a Shonekan, was made the president of Nigeria. So there was a lot of confusion because Mr. Shonekan could not control Abiola in prison. Whilst Abiola was in prison, there were a lot of activities about Abiola. There were lots of street routing in Nigeria. A lot of people didn't go to work. Workers went on strike. Nigeria was in chaos because they said the one who had won the election, Moshood Abiola, was actually in prison. On the streets of Nigeria, this is how it looked like in 1993. Have a look at this.
And we want MKO.
Who's MKO?
Abiola.
It will continue off and on until the military release the result of the June 12 election and put the democratically elected president, who is myself, in charge of affairs. I won't go to war. I won't encourage my supporters to go to war. I will fight for peace, and we will get peace. But see, we do not want the peace of a graveyard, a peace whereby somebody continues to ride on the rest of us with a gun. We will get peace, but we'll get peace with decency and integrity.
So this was Moshood Abiola soon after the election results were annulled, sitting in his house and granting an interview to the international community. Moshood Abiola was very, very popular and had thrown Nigeria into chaos. So Ernest Shonikan was present at this time, and Shonikan really did not have a grasp of what was happening. He had so many generals to deal with. He didn't understand what to do. Mohammed Sani Abacha had been in the works of most of the Nigerian coups from the 1970s. He was a very dedicated military man and very strong, and had held all the key top military positions. Abacha was rumored to have been part of almost every coup that had occurred from the time he was a major in Nigeria. And so he was always in the background. He was always in the works. He worked with Babangida. He worked with Buhari. He worked against the Shagari government. He worked with Obasanjo. So he was one of the seasoned Nigerian military generals who knew the Nigerian military thoroughly and who had been almost everywhere and had held every appointment. At this time, Abacha was the chief of army staff in Nigeria when all of these things were happening. So he sat back, looked at the situation, and also thought that Ernest Shonikan couldn't handle the matter. So one fine afternoon, Nigerians woke up to this announcement by Mohammed Sani Abacha. Have a look at this.
Ernest Shonikan took over as head of state and commander-in-chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces at the most trying time in the history of our country. Politically, economically, and socially, there were lots of uncertainties. Things appeared bleak, and the atmosphere was heavy with uncertainties. However, driven by the belief in himself, his countrymen, and love for his country, he accepted to face the challenges of our time. I would therefore like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to him for his selfless service to the nation. Consequently, the following decisions come into immediate effect. The interim national government is hereby dissolved. The national and state assemblies are also dissolved. The state executive councils are dissolved. The brigade commanders are to take over from the governors in their states until administrators are appointed. Where there are no brigade commanders, the commissioners of police in the states are to take over. All local governments stand dissolved. The directors of personnel are to take over the administration of the local government until administrators are appointed. The National Electoral Commission is hereby dissolved. All former secretaries to federal ministries are to hand over to their director generals until ministers are appointed. The two political parties are hereby dissolved. All processions, political meetings, and associations of any type in any part of the country are hereby banned. Any consultative committee, by whatever name called, is hereby proscribed.
So that's Mohammed Sani Abacha. Now, he looks very calm in that video, doesn't he? But this was one of Africa's worst and monstrous dictators that ever lived. Mohammed Sani Abacha ended up with a fortune of 5 billion. He died tragically, and we'll talk about that. But he ruled Nigeria with an iron hand, and it was one of the worst parts of Nigeria's history. That's how it began, with this announcement where he dissolved everything, dissolved the Electoral Commission, dissolved the political parties, and he said governors should hand over to brigade commanders. Where there are no brigade commanders, you hand over to police commissioners. This was a full-blown military rule in Nigeria, and he was not going to take no prisoners, Mohammed Sani Abacha. He went for broke, and he dealt with the people of Nigeria. Many Nigerians escaped. Many Nigerians were killed, including Moshood Abiola, who died in prison under the Sani Abacha regime. So it was a tough, really horrible incident with Sani Abacha. In fact, Abacha was criticized all over the world. And in 1996, by the time he was still in governance, Nelson Mandela had been released from prison And Mr. Mandela added his voice to the critical voices against Abacha. And guess what Abacha's reaction was? The Nigerian Super Eagles will not participate in the African Cup of Nations in 1996 in South Africa. He said Mandela had insulted him and he will not take the Super Eagles to Nigeria. Incidentally, that's how they became Super Eagles. They used to be called Green Eagles. Abacha held a conference, a meeting with them in Aso Rock, which had just been completed, a beautiful Nigerian presidential palace where Abacha lived in Abuja. He met the Green Eagles. He gave them National Heroes medals. He gave them a lot of money and named them the Super Eagles of Africa and made the big announcement that they will, however, not participate in the South African tournament because Nigeria was boycotting based on the sentiments and the comments that Nelson Mandela had made about him, Mohamed Sani Abacha. So this was the kind of leader that Nigeria encountered in those days. He was very, very brutal, and Nigeria gradually became a pariah state. No one wanted to deal with Nigeria. No one wanted to deal with Abacha. So we are bringing you the background against which the Flight Lieutenant Rawlings' relationship with Abacha and the money then became an issue back in the day, 18 or so years ago, and which has become an issue now. So the what actually turned the Abacha regime off the tip, you know, was the execution of a gentleman called Ken Saro-Wiwa. Saro-Wiwa, you will put him in the likes of Professor Wole Soyinka of sorts, because Saro-Wiwa was a writer and he was a poet. And Saro-Wiwa was from a part of Nigeria called Ogoni land. And in Ogoni, the people had oil. The Ogoni people had a lot of oil, and oil contracts had been signed to Shell, which is Shell, the petroleum company. Saro-Wiwa was against the environmental degradation of Shell, and Saro-Wiwa traveled around the world and campaigned against the administration of Mohamed Sani Abacha. He suggested and made allegations that Mohamed Sani Abacha was in bed with Shell, that he had taken bribes from Shell, that some of the oil that was drilled out of Ogoni went straight into Abacha's pocket, and Abacha was quite upset with him. So when Saro-Wiwa returned to Nigeria after one of his trips, he was tried by what many thought was a kangaroo court, but the court found him guilty of treason and he was sentenced to hanging. And the whole world came down on Nigeria asking Abacha not to implement the court's decision and the court's judgment to hang Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 others. This was the situation in Nigeria at the time. This was very, very precarious. Bill Clinton was the president of the United States of America. He wrote to Abacha, the Mother Teresa's of this world, the Pope John Paul's of this world. Everyone wrote to Abacha, says, spare the life of Ken Saro-Wiwa. One early morning, it was announced by a Nigerian television that Ken Saro-Wiwa had died by hanging with the 8 others, and Sani Abacha had carried out the judgment of the court. Let's see this video about Ken Saro-Wiwa.
Say that if anything bad happened in Nigeria, it didn't have to do with them. That's just not how it was conducting business. In a country like Nigeria, the power that that multinational had was enormous. In so many ways, it was calling the shots.
On May 26, 2009, a landmark trial will open in federal court in New York City. Multinational oil giant Royal Dutch Shell will stand trial, charged with complicity in egregious human rights abuses in Nigeria.
Ogoni is the land, the people Ogoni. The agony of trees dying in ancestral farmlands, streams polluting, weeping filth into murky rivers. It is the poisoned air causing the luckless lungs of dying children. Ogoni is the dream breaking the looping chain around the drooping neck of a shell-shocked land.
In 1990, amidst poverty, environmental ruin, and the oppression of life under a brutal military dictatorship,
the United Nations recognizes the rights of all the world's indigenous people. Indigenous people have been cheated through laws such as are operated in Nigeria today, through political marginalization. They have driven certain people to death. In recovering the money that has been stolen from us, I do not want any blood spilt.
So that was Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was the Ogoni leader that campaigned around the world over the activities of Shell and alleged that Shell had been in bed with the Nigerian government, and then he was hanged. At this time, Abacha was actually gone. In terms of credibility, Nigeria was suspended from everything that you can think about. The Association of International Airlines, Nigeria was suspended from it. United Nations, Nigeria was out of it. And Abacha had a key foreign minister called Chief Tomekimi. And Chief Tomekimi was not even allowed to attend United Nations sessions. And he will defiantly sit down at United Nations sessions, and it will be announced in New York that Chief Tomekimi must leave because Nigeria should not be part of the United Nations. This was the kind of pariah state that Abacha has sent Nigeria into. Nigeria was not part of the Commonwealth. They were actually part of ECOWAS because, by and large, ECOWAS was working in Liberia then, and Nigeria had significant troop representation among the ECOWAS countries. It is even believed by diplomats that it was largely because of Nigeria's involvement in ECOMOG that the United States decided not to help and assist the situation in Liberia. Nigeria was a pariah state. Within the context of all of these things happening, Ghana was growing in the Committee of Nations. Ghana had had an election in 1992, boycotted by the opposition, but Ghana had another election in 1996, markedly improved on the 1992 situation. The opposition had accepted the results. They had come to parliament. J. Kufuor had congratulated President Rawlings for winning the 1996 election. So Ghana was on the rise and the rise in the Committee of Nations as a new beacon of democracy in Africa. Nigeria was on the low and the low and the low. Within this context, Flight Lieutenant Rawlings then spoke internationally at the Commonwealth Summit and tried to explain the situation that people must understand Mohamed Sani Abacha. Now, that made the headlines everywhere because Rawlings was credible, because he was a Ghanaian leader and Ghana was rising in democracy. Freedom of media was in Ghana. Freedom of expression was in Ghana. The Supreme Court was working. The Supreme Court in Ghana had actually delivered major judgments against the incumbent government, and the judgments had been implemented. So Ghana was looking like a great democracy. So Mr. Rawlings was standing on a high pedestal of a democratic leader. Now, here was Mr. Rawlings then talking about Sani Abacha in a way that was getting people upset and worried about this great voice from Ghana defending Mohamed Sani Abacha. And Abacha had come to Ghana to visit during the inauguration of Mr. Rawlings in 1997. Abacha was the main guest here in Ghana, and that offended a lot of diplomats for Ghana to invite Mohamed Sani Abacha to become the key guest in the 1997 events here in Ghana. So this was the circumstances. So when the news broke that Abacha had actually sent $5 million to Mr. Rawlings, congratulating him for whatever it is, in return for, or as a result of, Mr. Rawlings' internationally mounted public defense of him, the story was believed and it caught fire around the world. This was the circumstances of this money. General Guazo, who was said to be the chief military person, was given responsibility to bring the money to Ghana. So 18 years ago, the Ghanaian parliament then had the information. Hackman Osu-Agyemang moved the motion for the matter to be discussed. Speaker D.F. said it cannot be discussed. Parliament voted against discussing the matter and setting up a committee of inquiry to investigate the matter. This was 18 years ago. Of course, the apologists of Rawlings or the government at the time all said that the matter was not true. And so the matter died a natural death in Parliament because the Parliament of Ghana voted by majority not to participate in the inquiry of whether or not Mr. Rawlings had taken $5 million from Mohamed Sani Abacha, the monstrous dictator. That's how the matter ended. Later on, Abacha himself died in tragic circumstances. He was killed. General Obasanjo was taken out of prison, even though he was on a death row. Obasanjo ran the elections and became president of Nigeria. The rest, as they say, is history. So this was the circumstances of Mr. Rawlings and the money. Well, 18 years later, Mr. Rawlings says he got the money, but the money was $2 million, and the money was not for his personal use. With this historical background, and we believe that is uncontrovertible historical background, I think that your guess is as good as mine. You can make your own choices. That's our work here at Good Evening Ghana. We bring you the historical facts. You can make your decision as to what to believe and what not to believe.